is, thank you for starting the recording, Jemima. A show that's sponsored by the Global Chamber of Commerce, and it's hosted by IP Rights for All, which is a social impact legal tech startup that has a mission of making it easier, less costly for underserved communities to protect and to monetize their innovation. I'm honored to be joined by a couple of subject matter experts, and we're going to hit some interesting, exciting topics with kind of an AI-powered element underneath. First, let me go to some brief house cleaning items. So shout out to Jordana Goodman, who has graciously allowed me to call her Jordy, and also to Daphne Ekpe, who is a colleague of mine, for being our subject matter experts today. And let's get the house cleaning done, and then we'll get started. So, I should say house rules. First one, we're not giving legal advice today. What we are doing is letting you know that even in these crazy tariff turmoil times, you're not alone. You have a community of the Global Chamber here with you as a resource for questions, for connection, collegiality, and potentially for business opportunities, because the Global Chamber is all about lawful international trade and global trade. But you also have folks who are doing individual things that may be relevant to what your aspirations are. So I want to make sure you leave this event with some knowledge and with the understanding that you can reach out, and we'll do what we can to support your aspirations. Got to give props to our subject matter experts today, Jordana Goodman, assistant professor at the Kent Law School, and also Daphne Ekpe, a noted intellectual property practitioner. In fact, we're going to ask them to briefly introduce themselves. So let's start with Daphne. Daphne, if you would briefly introduce yourself to the audience.
Thank you very much, Chris. Can you hear me?
Yes, we have audio.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Daphne Ekpe, and I am an IP practitioner. I am also the founder of the Journal of IP Professionals. I specialize in mostly trademarks and copyrights. I'm licensed in Nigeria and as well Alabama State, United States. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm excited to join this insightful panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Daphne. Jordy, how about yourself? What's up in Chicago?
Well, thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it. I'm currently an assistant professor at Chicago Kent College of Law, as well as an innovator in residence at MIT. My background is in patent prosecution. I worked for 6 years helping clients to secure patents. And now I work in research to ensure that everybody has equal access to attorneys and knowledge about the intellectual property field. And I'm really excited to be here to hear from all of you and to share knowledge.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Jordy. Jemima, are you in a position you can briefly introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, I'm Jem from Global Chamber Events Manager. Thank you for joining us today, and also feel free to check our events calendar. I will put it in the chat. Thank you. Thank
you, Jemima. And now before we move forward, let me also ask a task of you as the audience. Don't be shy. If you have questions or comments, put them in the chat, because it actually becomes a part of our live show. And this is a live show, so things might not go exactly the way we plan, but we're going to keep moving forward either way. And on that note, let's start with our hot topic. And I'm going to make a proposal what I think is hot, and then I'll turn it over to Jordy and to Daphne if they want to have a different view or a complementary view. What I think is hot is the promises that I made on our social media posts that during this event, we're going to address key innovation areas that seem to have traction in the marketplace. We're going to address aspects of the law that might be useful to you as our audience, whether you have zero budget, whether you have a small budget like my startup, or whether you have a big budget. And then we're going to share with you some findings on what's the impact on the tariffs. Because at the end of the day, one of the key drivers of the current economy is tariffs. So let me share the findings with you. And so if you have a startup or if you're considering it, this might be relevant. For the innovation areas that are making money or at least getting traction, agentic AI and AI governance are hot. As you can imagine, artificial intelligence is pervasive and it's growing in its momentum. Although keep in mind, it is not perfect, so it needs guardrails. Second, post-quantum cryptography. You've probably heard about quantum computing. Well, in our startup, we're already trying to think about how do we prepare for that? Because we use both blockchain technology as well as artificial intelligence. Third, sustainable materials. You've probably heard about the partnership that's starting between OpenAI and one of Apple Computer's former designers of note. Those kind of things indicate where materials and the technology and software and networks will be coming together. That's exciting. If you're doing something in that space, think about it. Next is healthcare. And we have both clients as well as we're seeing emerging policy focuses on healthcare writ large, wellness, technology, curatives, biology, medicines. And then last but not least, energy efficient computing. And if you haven't heard about Microsoft cutting a deal, I think, to open 3 Mile Island, a formerly retired nuclear reactor in Pennsylvania, then have your AI keep up, because that's a hot topic and they're trying to deal with energy as well as efficiency. So that's the hot areas. On the budget side, and I'm going to ping our panel here very briefly. So Jordy and Daphne, if someone asks you, what could I do to protect my unique idea at no cost? What would you suggest?
Well, I think the first thing that I would suggest is think about a consultation with an attorney. Most of the time, if you reach out and you say, I'm not quite sure what I'm interested in, but I'd love to hear your thoughts, attorneys would be happy to sit down with you because they're interested in a longer term relationship. So I think that would be the first step, would be to sit down and talk to an attorney about your options, whether that is protecting a trade secret, or perhaps getting something in the works to file a patent application. Of course, that's going to cost money, but in the short term, at least preparation is ideal. And then the other thing that I would think about is, depending on your financial situation and your qualifications, you might be able to reach out to a couple of law and legal clinics in the United States who would be able to help you on a pro bono basis. So certainly consider that as well.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Daphne, anything you want to share before I reveal the research response?
Yes, I want to add. I mean, she said it all. So yes, you have attorneys working in the space who either offer like pro bono or low bono, and also like looking for DIY materials, do it yourself. There are several like initiatives or materials, like for example, the IP rights for all under TIL. You can get useful information. I started an initiative while I was in Nigeria. That's Let's Talk IP with Daphne. I also have like useful information there, giving you like the first-hand information, right, about the types of IP, your work, and sort of like getting you started before seeking like, professional or like attorney, support.
Well, thank you for that. And so I'm going to ring the bell. Ding, ding, ding. The panel got the answer. The first answer for no budget was trade secret. And it is one of the most interesting things. You may say, what the heck is a trade secret? I'm going to paraphrase and I'll let my panelists correct me if I miss it. It's something that's perceived to have value in the marketplace that you take reasonable measures to keep a secret. So like non-disclosure agreements, other types of things that reasonably limit the audience to that, to those who are trusted and will keep that a secret. And you may say, well, give me an example. If you've heard of Coca-Cola, which you might have, and you've heard of Kentucky Fried Chicken also, those are two brands and organizations that leverage trade secret to increase their intangible asset value. because they're doing something that's perceived to have value in the marketplace, and they work really hard to keep it secret. So that's the most budget-friendly approach. Daphne, Joy, does that work for you? Do you have other ideas?
Yeah, I think that sounds like a good start to me. Just know that there are two different types of like protecting your trade secret. One of them would be limiting access to that trade secret in the first place. So that would be limiting attorneys or potential collaborators to, or potential employees to see that. And then the second would be internal measures. So perhaps keeping things behind certain electronic passcodes, or ensuring that you only give access at certain times of day, or you're very clear that you stamp that record to say that it's a trade secret in the first place.
I think Jordy may have worked for Coca-Cola because I heard they do things like that. Daphne, anything on your end before I go to the next rung of budget IP protection?
Yes, thank you, Chris. I was going to add to say, to remember that trade secret is one form of IP that does not require any registration, right? And from the name, it is a secret. So for it to be an asset, it must remain a secret. So basically keeping it confidential and like using agreements like Chris mentioned, as internal measures to ensure that it is kept a secret.
Well, thank you for that. And now moving up the rung from no cost, at least no direct cost, to budget. Copyrights, trademarks, and utility models are recommended as budget-friendly forms of intellectual property protection. And then for those who happen to have a deep bank account, relatively speaking, patents, other forms of emerging rights, and also, as Jordy and Daphne both represent and alluded, getting legal counsel. And one of the things to keep in mind, as Jordy mentioned, is that there are now programs and there are also initiatives, and the USPTO has them for pro bono counsel where they're available. And many law firms have an aspect of pro bono. In fact, I had lunch with a friend of mine who's a partner at a larger law firm yesterday, and he talked about the pro bono work that he does as part of his practice. So last point on my what's hot list was, okay, how does this tie into global trade? The research showed the following. Number one is we're experiencing increased cost. If you're having to pay a tariff, that's an additional cost to your business. Whether or not you can recover that cost, either by efficiencies or passing it on to your consumer, it's going to depend on competition. So to the extent you can innovate and come up with unique ideas that help you be more efficient, that's a relevant point. Second area is on supply chain disruptions, but also supply chain opportunities. If you can work with your supply chain participants to innovate new ways to be more efficient, that can help you survive the tariff situation, but also position you to be strategically more competitive on the other side of this. And then last but not least, and this one's definitely a concern in the healthcare space, counterfeit risks, in that the Patent and Trademark Office and other organs of the government have things they do to try to prevent counterfeit of products and services, like inputs for healthcare components, drugs, and other products that are false or misleading that may damage your consumers. So those are things to keep in mind as far as an investment is concerned. And there are also areas where you could innovate, like using blockchain to track the custody of your supply chain and be able to validate that. So that was something we committed on social media. We wanted to make sure we got that done. So it was a hot topic for me. Now we're going to move forward in our agenda. And just want to coach everyone, be interactive. Put your comments in the chat, because we'll be coming back to that. Now, this is one of the most, I find, to be interesting aspects of the show, the top 10 list. And so what we do is we go and we ask 4 leading large language models 2 prompts. Number 1, what are the top 10 developments in the world today? And number 2, which one's most important? Only once in 5 shows have they all agreed on what was the most important aspect of it. And before we start, because after I summarize it for you, I'm going to ask the panel if they agree with these large language models. I got to give a shout out to Meta, actually, on their LLM. The first time we asked this prompt, Meta's response wasn't top 10 developments in the world. They provided the top 10 things they thought were important for software development. Was it like kind of like a tone-deaf response from a large language model? We did the same prompt today, and it actually came back with something that was global, same language, different response. So someone in Meta in their programming area or their LLM trained itself to understand that we said in the world today, in developments, we didn't mean coding. We actually meant the world. So with that said, let me share what the AI said, and we'll see if our esteemed panelists agree. Claude said the most important thing today is the AI revolution, and it's potentially transformative, and it's simultaneously affecting every other development area, from accelerating client solutions in space to reshaping geopolitics and work itself. So props to Claude. ChatGPT's response was, the adoption of the World Health Organization Pandemic Treaty is the most significant development today. So that the world at least will be prepared to deal with the next COVID, although I understand the United States is withdrawing from that. Sidebar. Meta's Llama responded, the most critical development globally is the Israel-Gaza conflict. And last but not least, of the four that we queried, Perplexity's response was, the ongoing armed conflicts, particularly in Gaza, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, are currently the most important global developments. All of these things affect the environment in which we're trying to do global trade and make the world a better place. So let me ask our panelists. We'll start with Daphne. Daphne, do you agree with any of these large language models on the most important development today?
I agree because these are like global issues. You know, to pick anyone, I wouldn't pick anyone, but they are all like global issues. But yes, we have to agree that for me, AI revolution stands out, right? Because a lot is going on with AI, and particularly in the sector I operate, which is IP. We've been seeing like changes, a lot of like reform cases, on AI and all of that. So yes, I agree, prompts.
Well, thank you for that. Do you see any tie-ins to what we can be doing either at the Global Chamber or what you can be doing from a perspective of law to promote global commerce in a better environment?
Can you take that again? Can you rephrase that?
I'm looking for it. How could this tie into the impact that law, innovation, and commerce have?
Okay. I mean, let me take it from the like AI, right? And when you talk about innovation, right? So one of the things we've noticed, particularly in the law sector, is or there has been like sort of like questions, for those operating businesses and like creatives, as to what is the implications of AI as the effect, right? And everybody seems to rely on AI. I mean, this meeting, we have like note takers through AI functions. And, there are different views of how it could affect. Some people see it as negative disruptions and some people see it as positive, right? But generally, I think even on a global scale, right, I think that even for lawyers, business, entrepreneurs, everyone, like there are good effects with AI because it helps with invention. It really helps and take a lot of stress. But also like caution, particularly in what jurisdiction, because IP is territorial, right? Depending on what jurisdiction you are in, like to throw caution as to what you're feeding, because there's one on privacy issue as to what you're feeding to the AI, right? And then sort of like the training models and how they use your prompts. Another angle to look at is, for people who are like who are creatives, right? In the copyright space, for example, like when you create work with AI, like who owns the copyright now? Will it be the AI? Will it be yourself? And I will take like the United States, for example, right? The US Copyright Office still holds the position that when it comes to invention and creativity, it lies in the human factor. And so AI cannot be granted copyright, but at least they acknowledge that you could use AI. So when you modify your work, when you transform, your work, so basically what you put into the AI's prompt, when you take it out and modify it and try to change it, right, put in the human element, then you can sort of like seek copyright protection. I think it goes for almost like patents and everything you do with AI, right? So there's a caution, right? As it stands, United States, and different countries, different views. I mean, I know some countries are beginning to grant like protection to AI, right? Say for example, I know China is sort of taking like a two approach, either one on the AI inventor or basically on you, the user, right? Based on the like a sort of like approach in analyzing books. But I would say generally, for a global view, and while using AI and enjoying the positive advantages, to keep in mind what jurisdiction you are really operating in, and to also stay, abiding by the laws and regulations, so.
Hey, thank you for that, Daphne. So let's pitch it over to Jordy. Do you agree with these LLMs on any of those as being the most important global development?
Well, I see them as interacting in a certain way, especially with the AI revolution and impacting how we see the world and especially how we view conflict. With more and more algorithms that are going to be specifically tailoring your news to you and your political view, I can see how this could increase conflict rather than increase peace, especially with respect to armed conflicts all over the world and your particular views on it. Similarly, with vaccine information, that's going to influence whether or not you believe that the United States should or should not withdraw from a treaty to help people access their medical needs and to continue global development of that. I see AI as something that impacts my life daily, from classroom developments and how I need to teach my class and how I need to go about exams, to how I do research and how I see my colleagues doing research. And I think that it can be a tool to help, it can be a tool to hurt, and we need to be very careful in how we wield this tool to our advantage in the global system, just like we would any other tool that's at our access.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Jordy. So building on that, I want to just put a pin in what Jordy and Daphne shared. The ability to use AI wisely is in flux. As attorneys, we're seeing a number of sanctions and a number of events where attorneys or even parties in litigation are being called out by the courts and sanctioned because they used hallucinated AI-developed precedents, citations, etc. So that emphasizes the need for both the technology, but equally, if not more important, the human element. And that is a great segue to the next point that we're going to share. We also, as IP Rights for All, have an AI. And our AI's name is Tilly. And Tilly doesn't do global developments. Tilly does one thing. She's a 24/7, 365 artificial intelligence consultant. So we asked Tilly to tell us about top 10 global development. She said, I don't do that. I'm paraphrasing. But we said, okay, well, what about top 10 things in intellectual property? Tilly named her top 10, which you see on the screen. And we said, which one's most important, Tilly? Tilly indicated, complimentary what Jordy and Daphne have stated. The integration of AI and intellectual property is the most important development today. And from what we've found, not only from our work in developing Tilly for our social impact project, but also to pull some learning from a global chamber event held earlier today with Jacob Dietz and Yuka Nakasone on the human behind the AI. We firmly believe that the most powerful combination is, in fact, that it's the human with your unique story, your journey, which no one else can replicate, and the technology. And that's what makes the most powerful combination. And Tilly, we think, represents that from what we're offering. So keep that in mind as we now pivot to our feature session. So we're going to ask Jordy and then Daphne to take us on a 5 to 10 minute journey about their why and some of the key things they've worked on that may be of interest to you. So that said, I'm going to hand it over to Jordy and see. Jordy, please take 5 to 7.5 minutes to share your story.
Oh, sure. So I'm really excited to share the work that I'm doing that really starts off with like a discussion of intellectual property and patent prosecution and representation of teams. So just as an introduction, to get a patent protection for an invention, the inventor has to send an application to the United States Patent and Trademark Office, and well over 90% of these patent applications are filed by an attorney. The USPTO then assigns that patent application to an examiner who determines if the application is going to be allowable for a wide variety of factors. And then the examiner might issue something called an office action, where the attorney or inventor, if they don't have one, must respond to for the application to become a patent. So you see that there are three key players in this process: the inventor, the examiner, and the attorney. And what I've been doing as a research experiment with Mike Schuster is talking about why did people tend to choose their attorney? Why are attorneys who are female tending to work with female inventors more often, given their both underrepresentation in the field? Specifically, we're finding that in recent years, about 12 to 18% greater than all female team likelihoods would be a woman working with a woman. Now, we also note that the odds of getting a patent granted are lower for all female inventor teams and for female patent attorneys relative to their male peers. So why would they work together? Wouldn't they have some kind of a double whammy effect of negativity? But we're actually finding this interactive effect that we think is really important to highlight, that female inventors who are working with female attorneys see a positive interactive effect. That is, their negative effects are mitigated somewhat when they work together. And we see increased claim scope, that there are fewer word changes for female inventors working with female attorneys, meaning that they have more predictive intellectual property results from the time of filing to the end. We also note that in litigation, we're seeing very similar trends. Now, of course, in litigation, you don't have an examiner, you have a judge. But we note also, similar to patent prosecution, that you have an underrepresentation of the lawyers in litigation, both from a gender perspective. 13% of those giving oral arguments in patent cases are female. And in race, 91% of everybody who's arguing in front of the federal circuit in patent cases are white. But we also see an increased representation in government. That is, you're split about 50-50 female to male in government, but not so much in private sector, where a government lawyer is over 5 times more likely than a private sector lawyer to be a woman. And even in government, you see a government lawyer is 2.3 times more likely than a private sector lawyer to be a lawyer of color. And so you'd think that with all of this disparate representation, that there might be a reason why these private sector law firms aren't hiring women and people of color, or perhaps not putting them in front of the federal circuit. But the win rates, as we found, were basically indistinguishable, except that women lawyers representing appellees at the federal circuit for patent cases did better statistically significantly than their male counterparts. And elite lawyers representing appellants, those people who got multiple times to represent people over the course of their careers, they had more experience. They were able to have a higher win rate than the average attorney. So in both of these scenarios, what I'm doing here is showing that representation really does matter, and team dynamics matter. We can't just say that because one group of people isn't doing well, that we can't look at the larger picture and see if there are mitigating effects when you work together successfully with other people. And I don't like lumping people into one box to say that they are or are not successful. We have to look at all aspects of this. And third, I think that what's most important is that leaky pipeline phenomenon, that argument that, oh, we just don't have enough people to hire, or that people just keep falling off for for reasons outside of the law firm's control or perhaps outside of industry's control really doesn't account for all these differences in representation that we're seeing. So having ways for businesses to hold themselves accountable and to help with this process, I think could really contribute to their bottom line too, because it's not just about who's there and who's representing. It's the fact that you might be losing out on quite a bit of money if you're getting a better grant rate with a female attorney representing your female clients. You might be getting more wins if you have a woman representing somebody in the appellee section in the federal circuit. And so considering this representation, I think is a really vital takeaway, that anything related to just DEI is not just meant to be a sticker to feel good, but it can certainly also impact your bottom line commercially. And I think that's really the next step is people internally evaluating to see how they can better commercialize the aspects of inclusion, diversity, and equity. Thanks.
Wow. Very powerful, Jordy. And if I may, consistent with our kind of like, we're like the Saturday Night Live of a nerdy topic show. If I were to say, if you're a company or a country and you're not investing in your people so that your innovation practice looks like your population, you're probably missing the boat.
I agree. I think that it's really important to note that the people who felt more comfortable coming to me were likely people who saw me advocating for them, me speaking their language, me having some kind of knowledge overlap with them. And certainly as a woman in STEM, I think that when I got the few opportunities I did to represent female clients, I certainly noticed a difference in our dynamic and teams kind of working together. And I think that that might be noticed both by the client as well as by the attorney. And I think the law firm should also start to recognize not necessarily only pairing people of color with people of color or women with women, but noticing that everybody has something to advocate for, everybody has a different style, and harnessing that style might really be what makes a difference in terms of getting your client across that finish line.
Well, thank you for that. And I know that in order to stay compliant with the applicable law, by enhancing the choice of both the applicant as well as the attorney, we all benefit from that. So that's a great platform and a baseline for us. And now, Daphne, please come in and enhance that with your share of what does launching a law journal matter to making the world a better place?
Thank you, Chris. Before I speak on the topic, I would say, so, I mean, so as an attorney, right, I'm more on the legal side, and now I am starting my own journal, so which is basically making me like a creative. So I think I have a balance of both worlds. I think that's a beautiful experience for me. So when we think of law journals, right, or basically when you pick up like a journal or a book, right, let's make it a journal. You think of how to get knowledge, and then you read it and you get information, you get peace and you get knowledge. And of course, we have like, in different areas. Now, coming to law, we have like law journals. But mine is not just a law journal. It is a journal that is focused, on IP. And the reason why I'm starting this is because I write a lot on IP space, particularly with with the emerging technology. And then I realized that there is this, should I call like a gap? So oftentimes you find like people that are into like research, those in the academia, right? They do more of the scholarly writings. And you have those who are, practicing as, attorneys. They focus more on helping their clients and businesses. I might not really like be out there in terms of writing. And so I wanted to start out. I started my journal because I thought about for me bridging the gap, right? Because I feel like we could have a mix of those in academia and those, the practicing attorneys. And that will make it really better, because now you're not getting just the theory, right? You're getting from practical experiences, right? So imagine someone like Chris Bennett, for example, writing in the journal. Now he's speaking from his experience working with entrepreneurs, right? He's speaking from his experience, finding like the whole IP rights for all and what TIL, seeks to do, right? And that is what I was sort of like looking for. And when I was doing my research, I think I just found this whole like academias, those in academic, writing theirs, and some of them don't practice, right? And then you might have a different perspective, right? But to drive it home to businesses, to entrepreneurs, and to creatives, it would be good to have a blend of people who are actually practicing. Hence why, it's called Journal of IP Professionals, because it's bringing in everybody, in the IP sector. And for me, this is like I said, it's beyond a law journal, and it is set to make a difference, right? And you might ask me how. Now it is gonna be a catalyst for change, right? Because while we're writing to inform, like the readers and the audience, but we're also looking at even regulatory reforms, right? What do you think what's the lacuna, right? And what do you think needs to be, can be improved on? Because this journal is gonna have like wide circulation. You can actually influence, policy without necessarily being in the legislative arm. From writing, you can actually be like influence policy and, advocate for why you think this policy should be, advocate for changes, what can be done, how can there be a balance. For instance, we talked about the whole AI issue, right? And I'm someone that believes in the balance, because I don't believe that you should get rid of AI. At the same time, I also don't want people like, people who create their work. I think it's unfair if you're using, their copyright works and they don't get any benefits, right? And this is like an infringement, right? So what is the incentive for the creators? So I as a writer, I'm in that kind of like, I'm in the middle, right? And I'm seeking a balance, right? And so one of the things I do personally is to advocate for better policies, right? Seeking a balance, between the regulatory framework and, what you have currently. And so, so that I don't, overbore. But yes, my journal of IP Professionals, it's coming soon to be launched in June. It's called JIPS for short. It's basically just changing the narrative, right? And it's sort of like fostering, inclusivity, because it is not just a journal for just those in the United States. I'm talking about global, right? It's a journal that will have like global writers, all over the world. So Nigeria, United States, South Africa, and we hope to extend, to more, like want to have like a wider outreach, because I believe that we can make the world a better place if we are able to influence, right? If you can also give back to the community, if you can give knowledge and you can influence. And that's basically where I'm standing from. Like I mentioned, I started my initiative, Let's Talk IP with Daphne. At the time when I started my initiative in Nigeria, it was because I was practicing IP, and I would have people, like musicians or even creatives ask me, what's copyright? Like the basic question. Oh, I'm a writer, I'm a song producer, what do I need to do? I don't know about IP. It sounds abstract to me. And IP is not abstract. I say IP is everywhere you go. You can relate to it. You can, the book you touch, the technology in your house, think of IP. And that was why I started that initiative, to sort of like educate people, right? And break it down to them. So I have like blog write-ups, like breaking it in the simplest form to how you can relate to. So you could read it and know, okay, this is what copyright stands for. It means creative work. Now I'm better informed. Now I can make better choices. So now the journal is a step forward, right? Because it is blending the ability to break down concepts into simple forms, and is bringing in perspective globally from, practitioners and professionals, everyone who is doing IP all over the world. And so I believe with these, we can transform. I mean, the theme for this first edition is focusing more on emerging technology. And so I would say you should look out for that. Thank you very much, Chris.
Daphne, thank you for that. And I will share that intellectual property and copyrights are real. We have a client that actually accidentally arguably infringed on the copyrights for another party. And we work with that client to address that in a way that was fully compliant, but reasonable. So folks are enforcing that because that is something that reflects the creativity. It's a product of the mind. And that kind of brings us into moving into the final steps of our journey for today. For the hot mic moment, I'm going to bring together very briefly the confluence of three things. I mentioned the event for the Global Chamber earlier, talking about artificial intelligence and the human behind the AI. You've heard Jordy and Daphne talk about intellectual property rights and the awareness, whether it's awareness of having choices of attorneys who make you more comfortable as a creative, or having choices of clients who are empowered because they know you exist as an attorney that might resemble them, or they may be more comfortable. Or Daphne's talking about just awareness in general. Please understand that each person has their own life journey. You are unique in what you've experienced, and anywhere along that experience, whether it was traumatically positive or negative, can influence something that you create, an invention that saves lives, or a poem or a song that motivates someone to do something outstanding. That's the human element that we really want to amplify, and the awareness raising. And that's the hot mic moment for us. How do we position ourselves as people, as individuals, to understand the agency that each individual has to create, to produce products of the mind, and then to, if they meet the standard, register and protect it, and use that product to pursue their aspirations. I'm unaware of any legal economic opportunity that is so democratic that we want to evangelize making people aware of that, because that comes into global trade and creating products, as well as to creating business opportunities and also empowering individuals. And law is one mechanism to making that happen. So that's our hot mic moment for today. And we have a couple minutes, so I want to do a couple things briefly. Number one, next show is going to hyper focus on innovation in a specific sector. We'll be getting information out that starting in about a week from now. And we want to give our panelists some time to offer their closing remarks in 1 minute or less before we adjourn. And while they're doing that, I'm going to be looking in the chat to see if there's any open question we haven't asked. So let's start with this time. Jordy, any closing remarks, closing arguments?
I just thank you so much for having me here. I really appreciate it. And I'm really excited to hopefully chat with many of you in the audience about programs and initiatives that you might be interested in order to increase your bottom line, perhaps by looking at your business and how you can increase representation.
Thank you for that, Jordy. Daphne, closing arguments.
Thank you very much. Like I said, I'm honored to be here, and I'm looking forward to connecting with everyone. And I would say, as you go back, like, or as you leave here, think about how IP can, influence what you do in your business, if you're creative, and, just try to do better, right? And then see how to maximize, value from your invention. And I'm gonna put the LinkedIn link to my journal. So please feel free to stay connected. And the first edition is really going to be very informative. Thank you.
So Daphne, Jordy, Jim, Global Chamber community and audience, thank you so much for investing the time and listening to us. The presentation contents will be available if you like through the Global Chamber. And peace, we're out until next time. Take care and have a great Memorial Day weekend. And thanks to everyone that you know for their service of their country. Goodbye now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you,
Goodbye.
everybody.
So much.
Great job, Chris.
Thank you.